You know, this is why I find it foolish to even entertain the question of who had the shorter end of the stick. During a period of history when men and women had very different sticks to carry, and when there was little to no option for anybody to choose a different stick than the one they got. The end of the stick that men may have gotten might have been longer than the ends of women's sticks, but the stick itself was heavier and more difficult to lift by a long shot. And while I know feminism is largely anti-science, I can demonstrate that through a simple biological argument. When the conditions two animals are subjected to over an extended period of their evolution, two species or two different breeds or whatever, are very, very different. One of the easiest ways to determine who had things harder or more onerous is to look at what their biology has to tell us. Now, if we look at monogamous primates like marmosets, the males and females live nearly identical lives. The only real difference between male and female roles in that species is that females gestate, give birth, and lactate, and males don't. Males do, however, collect food, nurture and supervise the young, and they are chosen as suitable mates by females based on how well they perform the exact same tasks performed by females. In fact, if you want to get right down to it, marmoset females choose males based on how good those males are at mothering. And then when you look at male and female marmosets, you can't really tell them apart. They're the same size, they have the same muscle mass and density. You know, other than their reproductive organs, they're basically interchangeable because they do all the same stuff, and they've done all the same stuff for a very long time. Marmosets are gender egalitarians. Now look at humans. Men have stronger skeletons, higher muscle mass, stronger muscles, even controlling for mass, and more red corpuscles by blood volume than women do. Now, would those differences exist if women's roles through history were remotely as strenuous, onerous, or dangerous as men's? If natural selection pressures on women had been as severe and rigorous as those placed on men? Now, what our sexual dimorphism tells us is that men had to be capable of doing physically harder and more dangerous tasks than women did, consistently, all through our history as human beings, and that women were not subjected to this kind of pressure. If they had been, they'd have evolved to be a lot more burly. And what's really interesting is that very little of that strenuous, dangerous work that men did was actually necessary for the survival of individual men. I mean, think about it for a minute. How much more work would it be to provide for a family than only for yourself? You know, I could tell you a thing or two about that. If the only person I had to take care of was me, I could live like a queen on a waitress's pay. Never have to put off buying something I wanted just because the people dependent on me would rather eat dinner tonight than see me in a new pair of shoes. You could also ask yourself, how much more work would it have been for a man way back when to provide for a wife less productive than he was, and several even less productive children, than to only provide for himself? How much less safe was he if he chose to protect a woman smaller and weaker than himself, who was often vulnerable due to pregnancy and childbed, and several vulnerable children, than if he was the only person he was responsible for keeping safe? If men had not been prepared to willingly take on those burdens in order to spare women from them, guess what, Danielle? Women would have sturdier skeletons and bigger muscles than they do, because they'd have had to evolve those things in order to survive. I honestly don't know how it was that more men didn't do what the Buddha did. Just walk away from those burdens. I mean, that guy sure had a lot more time to just, think about stuff and ponder the nature of the universe and sleep in and get himself as fat as fuck once he didn't have a wife and a kid to look after. I don't know if you realize this, Danielle being feminist and therefore anti-science, as you are, but male provisioning and protection of females and young is a gift and a luxury that few females of any sexually dimorphic species have ever enjoyed. Just ask a female bonobo. She gets to trade sex with every unrelated male in her community in return for foraging rights and male ambivalence toward her offspring. Not for actual food or for assistance in caring for offspring, but for the right to do her own foraging in an area that a male might actually prefer to have for himself, and the right to not have her offspring fall victim to competitive infanticide by a male who would rather she produce his kids than his brothers. Because that's the way most of nature works, Danielle. And it isn't the way human society has worked for a very long time. One of the reasons human women have been able to remain significantly weaker than men is because men were consistently subjected to more extreme and demanding conditions than women all through history. And one of the reasons we don't have more in common with bonobos, why we've become the most dominant and intelligent species on the planet, in fact, is because women and children benefited from men doing that, being subjected to those conditions. Because men, unlike bonobo males, were actually willing to share the benefits and rewards of their harsher survival conditions with women and children. Because women, unlike bonobo females, were willing to individually trade something valuable in return for an individual man's investment.